31. Briar's clawed at the legs of her Jean as Ashley sifted through the underbrush near the edge of the forest. Kyle out front of her and Shane following close behind. In the clearing down the slope, the lights from Lonnie Barrett's farmhouse glowed like stars, small patches of gold in the shadowy darkness. Ethan's cousin had a long history of run-ins with the local sheriff department. The whole county knew Lonnie was involved in the operation of several illegal enterprises, including moonshining and chopping cars. But although he'd been arrested on more than one occasion, the local authorities had never been able to make the charges stick. Lonnie had always managed to wrangle himself out of trouble. He was slippery like Ethan. Of all the Barrett's family members in Laurel County, Lonnie was the best known for being able to find creative ways to outmaneuver law enforcement. He was an expert at hiding things, like moonshine stills and stolen car parts. And if her older brother instincts were correct, maybe a cousin who'd escaped from prison. Kyle came to a halt in front of her. He knelt next to the base of an oak, tugged off his backpack, and pulled out a pair of binoculars. He glanced up at Ashley and Shane and then killed his flashlight. Both she and her younger brothers followed suit. Ethan had been spotted at Laurel Creek, south of Mettler's Ridge city limit, earlier that morning. If he'd been camping in the area, it stood to reason that he'd abandon his post and head to the other end of the county to avoid being caught. Lonnie's place sat outside the northeast boundaries of the town, on the edge of the county line. His sprawling acreage seemed like the perfect hiding spot. Ashley watched as Kyle peered through the binoculars, her eyes adjusting to the sudden darkness. In the distance, a screech owl called out. The haunting cry frayed her already jangled nerves. Kyle stood and then handed Ashley his binoculars. She scanned the property. The silhouettes of two outbuildings and a large barn loomed before her. She shifted her focus to the windows of the farmhouse. Most of the curtains on the backside of the house gaped open, but she didn't see any people inside. She held the binoculars out to Shane, but he shook his head, seeming eager to get on with their mission. "You two ready?" Kyle asked him, his voice just above a whisper. "Yes," Shane quick to reply. Ashley knew Shane had been itching to hunt for Ethan since the minute her ex-husband had escaped from prison. If given the chance, her younger brother would most likely have shot her ex-husband years before, when they first found out what Ethan had done to Ashley, that he had abused her and dumped her in a hole in the ground. Kyle, Shane, and their father had all three wanted to kill him. The only thing that had stopped them was the fact that Ethan was already in custody. They couldn't get to him as long as he was in the hands of the law enforcement. Now Ethan was no longer protected. Ashley realized that as an escapee, her brothers believed that Ethan was fair game, and she knew they were determined to make sure her ex-husband never hurt her again. "Let's start with the barn," Kyle said. Single file, with Ashley still in the middle, they crept from the cover of the trees into the soft light of the quarter moon. With her eyes now fully adjusted, Ashley could identify most of the objects around her. The trio scurried across the clearing, heading towards the barbed wire fence that encircled the barn and pasture area. The fence snagged the seat of Kyle Pants as he climbed over. He helped hold the top wire down while Ashley crossed into the pasture. Straight ahead, a small herd of black Angus cattle huddled next to a pond. She followed Kyle as he veered right, looped around the pond, and snaked towards a large wooden structure, mindful of where she stepped. According to her brothers, the sheriff's department had swarmed Lonnie's property searching for Ethan on the day he escaped from prison. Unless they received a tip that he was hiding in the area, the deputies wouldn't be likely to return. But in the off chance they did come back, it would be smarter for her ex-husband to bunk in the barn's hay loft rather than in the house. With Shane not far behind, Ashley stuck close to Kyle as he skulked along the side of the barn. When they reached the front of the building, Kyle motioned to both her and their younger brother and then pulled the AR-15 from his shoulder. Ashley nodded and drew her pistol. After signaling to make sure she and Shane were ready, Kyle inched back to the right sliding barn door. Leading with the barrel of his rifle, he slipped inside. Ashley followed. Skilled at stalking the woods in search of wild game, her brothers were accustomed to moving in tandem, not making a sound. Keeping between them, Ashley matched their careful strides, mirroring their every step. Without the aid of the moonlight, she could only see a few feet in front of her. She wished they could switch on their flashlights, excuse me, but knew they needed to make sure Ethan wasn't lurking in the shadows first. Kyle stopped in front of her. He stood still as though he was listening for an indication that they weren't alone. Silence filled the barn. If Ethan was inside, he was either asleep or he was hiding, waiting to ambush them. With Ashley at his heels, Kyle plunged further into the gloom. They edged between a tractor and a row of metal barrels probably used to store grain. Just ahead of them, she could make out the shape of the ladder leading to the loft. Kyle looked back over his shoulder at her and Shane pointed upwards. She saw her younger brother nod in return. As they neared the ladder, she heard movement above them. Ashley froze, and so did Kyle. The hairs prickled on the back of her neck. She looked at Shane. Her younger brother had obviously heard the noise too. If her ex-husband was awake in the loft and Kyle climbed up, it would be like committing suicide. As soon as his head popped up over the loft floor, Ethan would blow his brains out. An idea struck Ashley. She held up her hand and signaled for Kyle to stop and wait. She noticed a shovel leaning next to the tractor. It just might be what they needed. She slinked back through the shadows, retracing their steps. After grabbing the shovel, she returned to the company of her brothers. She holstered her pistol, motioning with the shovel, and then pointed upwards. As she made a move towards the ladder, Kyle caught her and pulled her back. From his hand signals, it was clear he thought she intended to climb into the loft, and there was no way he'd allow it. She pointed to herself and shook her head. Then she pointed to the shovel and then to the loft. This time he seemed to understand. Knowing Kyle and Shane would cover her, she crept toward the ladder. Gripping the shovel, she nodded to her brothers and then prepared to climb upwards. When her foot touched the bottom rung, she heard the noise above her again, a strange rustling. Holding her breath, she eased upward. When she neared the top of the ladder, she hooked her right arm through the rungs and braced herself for the gunshot blast she knew would come. The handle slick with sweat, she inched the blade of the shovel above the floor of the loft. In the gloom of the barn, the round blade would look just like a man's head. Ethan wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Ashley's pulse quickened as she raised the shovel just high enough above the floor that it would still look human. She waited for the blow, her muscles tingling. Nothing happened. She lowered the shovel and then raised it a second time. Still nothing. She was about to climb back down the ladder when she heard the rustling again. She looked up. The sound rushed towards her. Ashley choked back a scream as a large, dark ball hit her square in the face. Chapter 32. The ball slammed into Ashley's face with the force of a rocket, almost knocking her from the loft ladder. The shovel slipped from her hand and clanked to the dirt floor below as she clung to the right side rail. The dark mass ripped down her left arm, heading for the ground. It was no ball that hit her. The dark form had teeth and claws. Ashley's left cheek stung from either a scratch or a bite. She wasn't sure which. She was thankful the camo shirt Kyle had loaned her was long sleeved, or her arm would have been shredded. Kyle grabbed her legs from below, steadying Ashley's feet on the rug. Barn rat, Shane whispered. There was no need to be quiet now. The clatter of the shovel crashing to the ground would have alerted anyone hiding in the barn. But she didn't think Ethan was there. Her ex-husband wouldn't have missed the opportunity to blow someone's head off, or rather, to shoot at what appeared to be a man's head. I'm going up, she told Kyle. Oh no, you ain't. It was just a rat, we heard. Ethan's not up there. I'm sure of it. That don't matter none. There could be more rats or something worse. You let me go first. Ashley moved aside and allowed her older brother to mount the ladder. When he was at the top, she saw a beam burst forth from his flashlight. She decided it was time to follow him. Getting a firm grip on the side rail, she climbed up the ladder into the gloom of the loft. At the top, Kyle stood about a yard in front of her. He panned his flashlight across the floor. Stacks of hay bales materialized on their right. Hearing Shane's feet thump on the ladder rungs behind her, Ashley moved further into the loft. She pulled her own flashlight from the pocket of her camo shirt and aimed the beam toward the far left corner. Part of a hay bale lay propped against the wall. The twine holding it together had been cut. The remainder of the hay had been scattered across the floor in the shape of a bed with a clump for a pillow. Shane appeared beside her. Look at this, Ashley instructed her brother, shining the light on the makeshift bed. Well, I'll be damned, Shane said. Ethan had been there, but how long ago? He had to have arrived after the sheriff's deputy searched the farm, but when did he leave? Was he still staying here? Was he up at Lonnie's house right now? If so, he could surprise them at any moment. She stepped closer towards the bed. The rotting remnants of a bunch of bananas lay screwed about the foot, probably what the rat had been eating. Blackened by the time and the heat in the barn, they seemed to have been decaying there for a couple of days, which meant Ethan had been most likely moved on before today, or he was sleeping inside his cousin's house. Shane echoed her thoughts. He ain't staying here no more, her brother stated. Ashley swept the flashlight up toward the head of the bed. The beam hit something else. A brown, hard, black book. Moving next to the hay pillow, she picked up the book. It was an old church hymnal, the cover battered, the spine cracked. A piece of twine stuck out from the top, probably marking a page. Ashley opened the book. The pages were yellow with age. A shiver ran through her when she read the title of the song, Send in the Reaper. She skimmed the lyrics, Send in the Reaper, to reap the souls of the living, harvest of the word, send their souls to be judged. Is that what Ethan thought he was doing? Did he consider murdering to be reaping souls? Ashley knew her ex-husband had shunned all things religious, had never believed in a higher power. Was he searching for a way to justify his killing of innocent people in his own twisted mind? Ashley flipped to the front of the book. The copyright date was 1968. The inside cover of the hymnal bore a faded blue stamp. Now she knew where Ethan might be hiding. The stamp read, Property of Stillwater Chapel. Do the two of you remember that old abandoned church up by Metler's Fall? She asked Shane and Kyle. Her older brother met her gaze. You think Ethan's there? Kyle said. I'd be willing to bet $100 on it, maybe 1,000. The old abandoned building would provide a good shelter, and the myths about the church being haunted kept the locals away. So if Ethan chose to hide there, he likely wouldn't be found. Let's check the house before we leave, Kyle said. Make sure he's not inside. They climbed down from the loft and made their way out of the barn. Before heading up to Lonnie's house, they checked on two outbuildings on the property. One turned out to be a chicken coop and the other appeared to be a tool shed, padlocked from the outside. Lights no longer glowed in the windows of Lonnie's home as they had earlier. Ashley guessed the occupant had turned in for the night. Following Kyle, she mounted the back porch and then peered through the window into the living room. The interior was dark. She realized that short of breaking in, there was no way to know whether or not Ethan slept in one of the upstairs bedrooms. At this point, that was a risk they didn't need to take. The church seemed like a much better hideout. I think we should head over to the chapel, she told her brothers. The trio crossed the pasture and then headed back into the forest. They picked their way through the thick underbrush, moving south to the small clearing where they left the two four-wheelers that belonged to Kyle and Shane. Ashley climbed into the seat behind her older brother while Shane mounted his own. Still Waters Chapel stood on the southwest, only a few miles away. The engine of Kyle's ATV roared to life. The vibration traveled through Ashley's leg. They cut through the woods to the gravel road that led to their destination. She stared at the back of her brother's head and wondered whether they were doing the right thing. Ashley would give her life to keep her family safe. There was no questions. But she worried about Kyle and Shane. Her bond with her brothers felt stronger than it had ever been. It would crush her if something bad happened to either one of them. She wished she could have thought of an excuse to force Kyle and Shane to stay home, but she knew there was nothing she could have said that would have deterred them from hunting for Ethan. As they rounded a bend, the silhouette of the old abandoned church popped into view. The building sat back several hundred feet from the gravel road. Tall weeds flourished in what had once been a parking area. Kyle drove past without slowing the four-wheeler. Ashley guessed what he was doing. They parked somewhere down the road and walked back. If Ethan was in the church, they didn't want to scare him away. After they traveled about a quarter of a mile, Kyle steered the ATV off the side of the gravel road up the ditch and into the woods. He parked next to a large hickory. Shane pulled his four-wheeler up beside them. Kyle spoke to them in a hushed tone. I broke into church back when I was 16 on a deer. I went through the side door. Wonder if that's how Ethan's getting in. Ashley shrugged. The old church had been the backdrop for many of the ghost stories she heard as a child, so she stayed far away. She didn't know the layout of the place, only that the front door and the windows had been boarded up, most likely before she'd been born. It sounds logical to me, she told her brothers. With a nod, Kyle pulled his rifle from his shoulder. Ashley reached for her pistol. They had to be ready in case Ethan was prowling the woods. They left the four-wheelers and trekked through the forest. When the church came into view, standing at an angle before them, Kyle motioned to Ashley and Shane. They both nodded, indicating they were ready to go. Taking the lead, Kyle broke from the cover of the woods and slithered through the weeds toward the church. Ashley matched his pace, keeping only a few feet between them. The chapel's old wooden siding glowed silvery gray in the moonlight. Originally a pint-sized schoolhouse for the children living deep in the mountains. The structure didn't look like a normal church. The windows were sparse and the steeple that had been tacked onto the top of the building as an afterthought was narrow. They crept along the back wall with Shane close behind. The windows on the rear of the chapel were covered by boards, the same as the front. They kept going. Rounding the corner, they reached the side doors Kyle had broken into all those years before. It still yawned open, but just wide enough that an adult would have to enter sideways. Kyle squeezed through first. Ashley followed. She noticed her older brother had switched on his flashlight. She figured it was a good idea. Even though it was important for them to do everything they could to keep from being detected, they needed to see where they were stepping. The floorboards could be rotten and snakes or other wildlife could be nesting inside. Kyle kept the beam pointed straight at the floor instead of ahead of him. The first doorway they came to was on the right. While Shane stood watch, Kyle and Ashley eased inside. She wasn't sure what the tiny room had been used for, by the church congregation, but now empty beer cans and bottles littered the floor. Teenagers today obviously didn't have the same fear of ghosts they had when she was growing up. Leaving the drinking spot, they passed Shane and ventured forward. The next room had once been the sanctuary. Sanctuary. Old wooden pews still lined the walls. Ethan could be lying on one of the seats, the tall backs hiding him from view. With both Ashley and the younger brother covering him and his rifle at the ready, Kyle inched down the middle aisle, shining his light across each pew. The seats were all empty except for the hymnals, I might be pronouncing that wrong, tucked inside the wooden pockets that lined the backside of the benches. Together, the trio searched the remaining rooms of the church, but there was no sign of Ethan. It seemed he covered his tracks and moved on. This time, Kyle followed Ashley and Shane, retracing their path through the chapel. Their younger brother squeezed back through the side door first. As she slipped out into the moonlight, Ashley wondered where Ethan had gone. Maybe he was still back at Lonnie's house after all. Shane stopped in front of them and then turned around. "You smell that?" he whispered. A breeze had stirred up while they'd been inside the church. The gust carried a familiar scent, burning wood. Kyle stood still for a moment, and if he was judging the direction of the wind, "It's coming from over there," he told them. He pointed toward the woods at the rear of the building, in the opposite direction from which they arrived. There was no houses or hunting cabins in that part of the forest. It had to be a campfire. "Let's check it out," Shane said. Kyle took the lead again, leaving Ashley and Shane to fall in line behind him. As they pushed through the thicket of the forest, the odor of burning wood grew stronger. They hiked toward the scent, finally coming to a clearing about 12 feet square. An abandoned campfire smothered in the center of the glade. Kyle kicked at the churned tree branches. Embers glowed orange beneath the limbs. The fire appeared to have been doused within the last hour. "Look what I found," Shane said. Ashley glanced at her brother. Her pulse quickened when she saw the purple paper clasped between Shane's fingers. A Buster Grape bubblegum wrapper. They found Ethan's campsite. See you in the next chapter.